to give speeches, or are we having like a discussion?
If you want to give an opening statement first, I'm fine with that.
All right. Well, I would give the opening statement that uh, the definition of blackface, I believe, is a purposeful caricaturization of black people with the intent to make them appear different or encourage humorous judgment of them. I distinguish it from simply having a spray tan or even possibly like appearing race fluid um the way that certain people are able to, and sort of making themselves look darker on purpose. I wouldn't define that as blackface. I think that if you look at the history of blackface, um typically what it's included is sort of viscerally shocking in a lot of ways. And I would add that when something is considered a hate crime, it's often acting as a sort of amplification of behavior that is already bad. So if someone vandalizes or if someone assaults somebody else for this explicit purpose of discrimination, that tends to result in a harsher penalty. And I think that if someone were to, for example, carry out crimes while doing blackface, it's common sense that people would view that crime with an increased amount of scorn. And I think blackface doesn't really contribute anything productive. And so denouncing it as a hate crime isn't necessarily detracting from anything useful in society. And that would be my opening statement. So I'm open to your response.
Yeah, so I think we're going to be in agreement on the definitions of blackface and like what a hate crime is. I don't really have any bones to pick there. But I think that there's like a few contentions that I think should persuade the audience pretty clearly that blackface should not be a hate crime. The first is, are we going to ban parody movies? You know, like Robert Downey Jr. in what's it called, Tropic Thunder, right? Is that movie now a hate crime? We have to throw Robert Downey Jr. in jail for that. Seems a little bit ridiculous. What about documentaries about blackface? Is me doing a documentary about blackface now a crime? That would also be ridiculous. Um, Three, children can use costumes as a form of cultural exploration. So why are you going to throw little Billy in jail for dressing up in as a black character? Also seems a little bit bridge too far. And then also ma free speech is the fourth contention. And it doesn't seem like blackface itself physically hurts anybody. It's only people's reaction to it that is damaging. So it's people's own judgment of it themselves that are like hurting themselves. And so I don't think it's the state's job to protect people from their own personal tastes. So if you don't want to see blackface, you can just walk away, turn the channel, and it doesn't physically hurt anybody. So I don't see why it's a hate crime. And sort of responding specifically to the thing about, you know, if you did a crime in blackface, it would be worse. I agree with that, but again, the point is that a crime is already being committed. So like that just is evidence to show that it was like racially based, for example, and then saying that blackface itself by itself isn't a hate crime doesn't preclude us from saying that, you know, someone murdering somebody while they're in blackface for racist reasons is a hate crime. So let's get the dialectic going now that we've both done our opening statements here.
All right. Well, one thing you said that was interesting was the suggestion that somebody should be thrown in jail for doing something like in that Robert Downey Jr. movie, or a child idly sort of doing blackface without fully understanding the meaning. If we agree on the definition of blackface, it is a purposeful caricaturization of black people. It's not only an
Mhm.
imitation, it's not only a sort of change of your appearance, it's as a researcher on blackface culturally, put it Strauss-Ball, uh, blackface imitates such supposed innate qualities of blackness as inherent musicality, natural athleticism, etc. It's essentially saying, "Oh, black people are so funny. They're different from us." It is something that does have the same effect as a hate
Mhm.
crime or hate speech, because its explicit purpose is to alienate an entire demographic. If somebody comes and graffitis an old building, um, saying things like, like the N word, or saying that
Of
black
course.
people should be lynched,
Yeah, of
it's
course,
going to
that's
be considered utterly.
obviously
But it's an old abandoned building. They're not hurting anyone. They're not really damaging any property anyone cares about. But they're doing something that spreads the message that black people are different. They should be humiliated. They should be considered uh, inferior or humorous, and they shouldn't be taken seriously as people. And I believe that is what the purpose of a hate crime is. If not open violence, it's at least a dismissal of an entire race.
yeah, but I mean, again, now I mean, I just think that what you're saying just raises a new problem now that we've defined the definition in this way. Because how are we to determine, the child case is not trying to be a caricature of black people? How do we determine the difference between someone just wanting to look darker, as you said,
Yeah,
versus making this like, how do we draw that line? It's a
I
judgment
think
of
obviously
objective judgment.
it has to be uh, taken case by case in a logical manner. We don't accuse children of hate speech for saying the N word, or even if there's racial bullying in a high school, we don't sort of throw 14-year-olds in jail or even
Sure,
juvie. It's considered highly inappropriate. We teach them that this is not what you should do,
sure.
but it's not like we're going to be throwing children in jail for doing things that they can't understand because they're minors, or because they come from a background where they haven't encountered racism before. And so it should be considered a hate crime the same way that
So, I mean,
saying, yeah,
we can run the situation not with children. Let's say that there's like a theater company,
yeah,
acting company, and they need specifically they need some black characters, and the black guy is sick that day, and so they're like, okay, dude, you're playing whatever character, right?
yeah.
It has to be black, right? And so then that
Well,
guy has to put on blackface to fill in the role. That
I think
seems now we're at a hate crime.
the greatest example of that is probably Othello. People have been
Yeah,
doing blackface for Othello for ages. Well, I actually, that's the matter of contention. I wouldn't consider it blackface in that case, because they're not going out of their way to humiliate
sure.
Othello. I don't consider Othello to be a racist character.
Yeah,
Othello's
so
presented with dignity. He's the protagonist. He's an anti-hero, if anything.
right,
Um,
right, right.
and sort of that sort of thing would be, it wouldn't be considered blackface. It would be considered playing a role. Someone may consider that controversial or inappropriate, but it wouldn't be referred to as a hate crime. The matter that we're discussing is specifically blackface, which is the intent to
Right.
humiliate by caricaturizing.
But, I mean, you still haven't given me a test for determining if it's a virtuous blackface or, like, a vicious blackface. So, like, I'm
Yeah,
thinking of, like, legal tests, like, for obscenity, right? It's like if something is pornography if it doesn't have any, like, artistic merit and it's just purely sexual, right? Like, we have a
right, yeah.
test for that, but there doesn't
Well,
seem to be a test here that we can apply to blackface, and so it seems like it's becoming a meaningless concept.
I don't believe that the demarcations for uh, obscenity or for pornography are much vaguer than for blackface. If anything, blackface is a more concise label because it's a specific behavior where somebody makes themselves look black and um, takes actions to imply that black people are inherently different, especially for the purpose of humor. Now, you can look at any porn film and say, "Oh no, it was kind of artistic there, or there's some innate poetry to sexuality in the
Sure.
first." A lot of movies really push the line between being porn and being some French art house movie.
Mhm,
You know,
mhm.
I think that that would be the case for blackface as well. Obviously, if it's considered a hate crime, people would be taken to court, there would be lawyers, there would be a debate of what the intention was. And the same goes for sort of the line between hate speech and comedy. Sometimes in comedy, people make extremely risque jokes about races. And usually comedians get away with it because, firstly, their position is such that it's their job to be controversial sometimes. But even aside from that, most people are not willing to take them to court. We have to remember that laws in many cases are sort of optionally enforced in the sense that if somebody doesn't like what you're doing and they say, please stop this person from doing what they're doing, the law's on their side. The law's like, okay, well, in this case, yes, we've written down previously that if somebody is to do something like this, people should have the capacity to stop them because it's too harmful. You know, so there can be cases where there's sort of risque bordering on blackface maybe for artistic purposes, that's fine. But if somebody really wanted to say, "Stop this, it's not appropriate, it's not constructive," the law would be on their side.
Yeah, but, like, so, again, the reason why we don't ban pornography films or, like, a director coming to mind who did Caligula, Tinto Brass, very famous, very artsy, super interesting cinematography, great shots or whatever, recommended if you're over 18 or wherever porn is legal for you to consume in your country. But the reason we don't ban it is because drawing these lines is super difficult, right? What if we have like a Dave Chappelle sketch on the Chappelle Show that it involves a white guy in blackface making an explicit caricature of black people, and then Dave Chappelle comes on and mocks it and critiques it. The white guy in that thing just committed a hate crime, which
Yeah,
is
and I mean,
ridiculous.
if the person was employed, the situation is sometimes when you depict things like that, it's generally considered tasteless. If you were to say, "Oh yeah, we had someone come up on stage and say the N-word even though they're white and say that black people should be lynched, say that black people are an inferior race." And then we had Jimmy Fallon walk up on stage and say, "Isn't that silly, guys? I can't believe people do that." You know, it's very tasteless. It's very on the nose. It's not an elegant way to address the issue. You did bring up before the concept of it being covered in a documentary.
Right. That's
Again, even in a documentary, we cover these things sensitively. It's possible to talk about the issue and even depict the issue in a tasteful way that isn't actually doing the issue. You know, if you make a documentary about serial killers, you don't get footage of them killing someone. You know, it's sort of uh, something that you don't need to do to address the issue as a
I mean, I
concept.
don't know though, like, you get stuff from Jonestown, right? Like, if you've ever seen a Jonestown documentary, they play the audio of the last moments and show them on the runway or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Like, so, like, and, like, again, the main point here is that the reason why I don't like these hate speech laws is because now you're policing good taste, and, you're in the position where you're saying, "Okay, this was a tasteful representation, ergo it's not running afoul of the blackface law, but
Well,
one man's crassness is another man's highbrow humor, you know
yeah, that's a fair enough point, but the case is that there should be the capability to prevent certain sorts of depictions, and that is what this law would provide if we were to say that blackface should be considered a hate crime. It simply gives people the ability to basically tap out or draw the line and say this is too much. Now, that doesn't mean that's always going to be exercised. Of course, it's subjective. I don't consider it to be a general policing of art to have one stipulation for blackface because at the end of the day, it's not even that common. And when people do it, it often isn't necessary. It isn't necessary to the plot. We don't live in the 1400s anymore where black people did not act, you know? We have black actors now. If you want somebody to
Sure.
fill the role of a black person, you can just get a black person to do it. You can get an understudy to be their backup that is black. You know, it's sort of something that is already available to our society. We don't have to do anything to make excuses for, oh, but this white person really just needed to dress like a black person, and they really needed to specifically act in a way that makes fun of black people. It's not necessary. It's safer to just draw the line because its capacity for doing harm is so much greater than the sort of extremely fringe scenarios in which it does any good, just for the sake of humor.
I don't know, man. It's just like I can envision like a minstrel show sketch on SNL, and then Kenan Thompson comes out and just roasts them, or something hilarious like that.
Yeah,
Or
that could be
you know
very
what I'm
fun.
saying? Like I can envision that as being a legitimate like comedy art form that is serving
Yeah,
like a critical role, and
but
just blanketly banning something with blackface seems to, eliminate creativity and eliminate that sort of ability. And so I err on the side of let everything be okay, as
I
opposed to
think
picking and choosing.
I think that we should have the capability to pick and choose because, for example, in the sketch that you're describing, the funny part is him roasting the minstrels.
Correct.
It's not the minstrels. People shouldn't really be enjoying the minstrels themselves making fun of black people. It's like, even if you roast them afterwards, if you really did try to make that part of it good and really did just put on a blackface show for the sake of entertainment, that is kind of what the problem is with blackface in the first place, is that white people will look at it and be like, haha, black people are different from us. And that is going to leave an impression whether somebody comes up and roasts them afterwards or not. So what you could do in that case is you could have people dress up like minstrels doing blackface, but not actually partake in the activity of blackface. You could kind of maybe be a bit cheeky and push it a bit, but you couldn't have people come up and actually do a whole blackface sketch for the purpose of being roasted afterwards, because it's just not necessary. You can have that sketch with them putting on makeup, with them making sort of a joke that most people wouldn't draw the line at, that most people wouldn't take them to court over, because this is something that has to happen. Somebody has to take them to court, you know.
Mhm, I
Um,
agree. The other thing about this is I'm sure you could probably concoct some type of civil suit already for people who are getting offended by someone doing blackface. I'm sure that that's already
you
possible.
can, but they're a corporation, they're a comedy show. They do need to know that there are limits and that they can possibly be sued for skits that they show.
Sure. But I
Or at least there would be public controversy, and that would decrease their ratings. That would something that happens every day. It's part of the business, and this would just be another thing added. It isn't like, oh, somebody went up on stage, they're white, they're wearing makeup, banned. This is hate speech already. Go to jail. It's like, no, it's not going to be like that. It's just going to be, if somebody were to say this went too far, why did they do that? There was like no need. The law is going to automatically be more sympathetic to the person making that accusation. There is going to be a document saying that, okay, well, in this specific situation, what they've done is probably not worth it. This has been decided beforehand that blackface should be generally considered a crime. Um, but overall, I think that you could have the odd skit that kind of plays at it, or an example is like Eminem. He never says the N word, but
mhm.
he sometimes sort of puts a dud in his rap where he implies he's gonna say it, but then he doesn't say it, and nobody can accuse him of saying the N word. Nobody can be like, oh, well, you put it in your rap, you're racist, or you're appropriating something, or you're just assuming your place too much. It's like, no, at the end of the day, he didn't actually say it. He was able to get the laugh as if he'd said it without saying it. And I think that similar things could be done for blackface.
I mean, I just don't know why we need to make this a criminal matter. Why do people have to go to jail over this? I mean, they're not directly causing violence. It seems
Sorry,
I mean, robbing someone of their liberty and throwing
is
them
it
in jail seems like to way outstrip the actual damages that have been done. Why not just keep it like a civil matter? Why do we have to make this like criminal? You know,
I think that criminal matters are civil matters. Somebody can vandalism is illegal. If
yeah,
somebody
sure.
comes and spray paints the side of your office, you are able to call the cops and say, somebody made my building look like I didn't want it to look. They've damaged my business, they damaged my livelihood. Please punish them. And the law will be like, yeah, unless there was an extremely extenuating circumstance and there is a trial to make sure that there wasn't one, this is a crime. And we should be able to say, I want reparations for this. Um, Blackface would be similar. There would be cases where someone might do it in a very contained situation where nobody took offense, and then nobody would press charges. That's it. You're able not to press charges. If someone comes on the side of your building and makes beautiful art,
Right, a
and you're
mural.
like, actually, this makes my business look better, I want to keep it, they're not going to press charges. The cops don't automatically go like vandalism detected and go and search for the person who did it. Someone has to report it and say, this was a problem. It is against the law. Please do something.
Mm,
And I think that we should have that capability for blackface. The alternative is that people can do blackface and be like, oh, it's technically not a hate crime. I can get away with this. Guys, it's all in good fun. I was putting on makeup and making myself look black and humiliating black people and making them look different from everyone else. And that was the point of what I was doing. And it's not a crime. So if you want to make a case, the law is going to be more on my side. You'll have to make a pretty damn good argument and probably sort of target another law to get at me. And it's like, well, it's not constructive at all. The alternative is much worse than just saying, okay, well, it should be considered a crime.
yeah, again, I'm just thinking of that there's a bunch of cases where there seems to be a legitimate usage for making racial caricatures for entertainment, um, and I don't think that that should be, you should go to jail for that. I just think that, we already have a system in place. I don't think we need to add to hate crimes because now, like, a hate crime is just simply saying an off-color joke now, almost. I think best to leave it as a civil manner and not to throw people into jail over it. And I mean, again, it just seems to me, I mean, even like, again, I want to re raise the case of children. You can still be tried as a juvenile for criminal offenses, and raise the documentary point again. I think it's an important thing for us to learn about, from our cultural past so we don't, continue to repeat the mistakes of all this. So, um,
Yeah. But I
should
mean,
see what I'm trying to say, right?
the thing is, there is the case of sort of that being the responsibility or the option of people that actually belong to the race.
Mhm,
Generally, people who are like, "Oh, we're not racist anymore. It's okay to say the N word. I'm being progressive. I'm making people forget that the N word was bad." You know that that's not acceptable for a white person to do. It's acceptable for a black person to do because they're black and it's their own race and it's their own call. And
mhm,
they're not being sort of forcefully put in a situation wherein they're made to feel different or discriminated against, you know? And so for the case of blackface, if black people want to act funny and make fun of their own race, which they often do, that's fair enough, and that's sort of a a way of making right with the past because it's them making the joke. White people don't need to make that joke. It doesn't really have artistic merit, it doesn't have cultural merit, and the alternative is far worse than just banning it, or giving people the capability to draw a line.
mhm. I think, I've kind of said I hate to I mean, we're kind of still got a lot of time, but I think that the argument's been pretty laid out. I think we'll probably just go in circles and we're just going to disagree. I mean, I just think that freedom, I mean, I think generally, though, freedom of expression and another thing to think about that I just thought of is let's say like you do start banning certain caricatures as being under the guise of it being blackface, then that stifles, somebody who's wrongly imprisoned for doing blackface when that was not their intention, it was a misunderstanding,
Yeah.
then I mean, that seems to be like a terrible cost where you could
Oh,
throw
well,
people in just for trying out a new caricature that they may not have realized was offensive, but ended up being
Mm.
offensive, like some alien that they call or correct wrong, for example, or do something wrong, and now all of a sudden, by
Yeah.
accident, they're,
No, that is a definite risk, and I think we could move the discussion sort of more in that direction to avoid going in circles. I agree with the idea that people should not be sort of suddenly thrown in jail for just filling the criteria of something that's potentially a crime. We shouldn't be so mechanical that we just sort of detect that someone did this one thing and then destroy them. That is a problem in itself. But I don't think that saying this thing is against the law is the same as that. You know, Again, the enforcement of laws is technically optional. Someone has to call foul unless it's murder or something. And the sort of the example of the alien, for example, uh, that that entity would be sent to a court of law, and it would be discussed. In a lot of situations, if somebody, for example, if somebody is under psychosis, we don't throw them in jail for hate speech. If we see someone who's under psychosis doing hate speech, they don't know it's wrong. They have no idea what's going on. They're not themselves, they're mentally ill. And we don't throw them in jail for that. We get them treatment. Um, I think a case is similar for somebody who is from a completely different culture, has no idea that this thing is wrong, especially if it were so extenuating that they were like an alien in the sense that they knew nothing about our society and we knew that. I don't think we'd punish them. I think it would be treated leniently. That's the purpose of a trial. We already have courts of law to make sure that laws are
Mhm,
not like over enforced. And so I think that free speech is preserved, and it's not sort of running that risk of being too harsh, you know
mm,
um I think that in itself, I don't think people should be like, sentenced to 10 years in jail for doing blackface. I think that if somebody were to incite a lynching mob while doing blackface, something like
yeah, that
that,
would
that
obviously be
would
a
be that would
crime.
be very bad crime, and it would be worse because they did blackface, or if
Yeah,
they
right,
found.
that would be a
Yeah,
hate crime because the blackface justifies a racial motivation for it.
yeah,
Like, you should have
absolutely,
the freedom to say offensive shit if you want to. Like, I just
yeah,
don't see why that's like, as long as you're not, like, physically doing violence against somebody and it's just them getting offended, like, you're just it's like a very paternalistic, idea
yeah,
of what the state should be doing. Because now any type of offensive joke could be a hate crime because the reason you're banning it is the offense that people are taking, not like a
yeah.
physical danger or threat.
I agree that we shouldn't be babied by the state, but I do believe that there is such a thing as a crime that doesn't physically harm anyone. Again, the case of someone vandalizing something no one cares about, people can still call foul on that if it's hate speech because yeah, they haven't physically hurt anyone. They have just sort of uh caused a problem in a subjective way that's experienced completely in an abstract way. But hate speech is a thing. And the
Mhm,
reason is because it leads to physical violence. And even if it doesn't lead to physical violence, it worsens people's quality of life for no reason. If hate speech becomes the sort of societal consensus and it's accepted that, oh, people who look like this are different and worse, or people who act like this are degenerates, or people, of this race are innately inferior, whether we're violent towards them or not, um, whether we enslave them or not, they're gonna have less opportunities in that society. They're gonna be mistreated. There's going to be a lower quality of life for no reason because we're working off the assumption of equality. It's one of the tenets of our civilization. You know, we're not
mhm.
the same, but we should be equal in the eyes of the law, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think that again, sort of, I guess it is 40 minutes, so I guess we should be wrapping up soon. But again, I just think that you have to have a really, really good justification for stripping away liberties, and you have to be pretty damn sure that, the actual act that you're banning is that act when it comes to a courtroom. And with something like policing makeup, right, is essentially what we're doing. We're saying this makeup style has to be banned on something like it's such a subjective judgment like that. I don't
Yeah.
know if we want to start levying criminal charges, throwing people in jail, robbing them of all of their
Yeah.
liberties for basically an off-color joke. That just seems like an
I don't
overly I mean, at a certain point, it's like, well, you have a right to be offended at a certain point. Like, that's the only right that freedom of speech really grants you, right? I have a
yeah,
right to be offended to a certain degree, you know, if you get what I'm trying to say.
I get it, but there is a line that we draw, for example, with hate speech, where it's not only someone being offended. There's never any law for there are laws against slander and libel, but there's no real law against someone just insulting you and you being like, "You insulted me too much and hurt my feelings too much. Go to jail." It's like,
Mhm.
no, that's not really a thing. It's kind of um more so about this situation where people wouldn't be thrown in jail for off-color jokes, but it would be possible to sue them for that sort of joke, or it would be possible to get the police to come and stop them, because that's the distinction between something being a crime and something being suable, you know? It's that you can forcefully stop them from doing it, and I believe that because it does border on hate speech, especially the original definition of blackface, which has the intent of humiliation, that sort of thing should be considered a crime. I think that when it comes to the matter of freedom of speech, something to keep in mind is that humans are just subjective. A lot of our experience is subjective. There's such a thing as objective damage to property or someone's person, but most of our society is abstract. That's why in a court of law, we don't have like a machine that assesses damages. We have a room full of humans trying to sort of agree on what most humans would think of this. That's why we have jury. We have a judge who's a trained human who is versed
Of
in
course.
subjective matters so that we can sort of make a fair judgment. And it is all subjective, but it kind of has to be because a lot of the harm that can come to a person is subjective. There are crimes that you can carry out against a person like torture, like sexual assault, that don't actually damage their person that much, but are still considered terrible crimes because they subjectively damage them a lot, because they put them through so much distress that their life has been worsened. Um, and that should be a crime. And I think that blackface does approach that. Now, I don't think it's as bad of a crime as something like sexual assault, but it should still be considered a crime.
I mean, I think we've basically laid out all of our arguments here. I think that we're just basically going to be repeating what we've said before at this point. So I'm
Yeah,
good.
let's maybe we should call it there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we should call it there. I'm fine with letting you have the last word. You were the affirmative, so you
Yeah,
get
yeah.
the last.
Okay. Well, yep, that's that then.
Sweet. Thanks for debating, guys, and participating in the tournament. So now I'll just put the voting poll up in the debate chat. Let me just scan through here real quick. So everyone is eligible to vote except for Trop because he joined at like the 50% mark. Allie, you left and joined, but as far as I know, you were still here for 75% of the debate, so you can vote too. Sarah can vote, Walt can vote, and Zero can vote, and I can vote too. So yeah, everyone except for Trop basically. So I'll post the voting poll in debate chat, and you guys can vote. And also, if you two don't mind, we have a question from Walt that he would like to ask both of you. And this is directed towards both of you. You can just, I guess, answer it one at a time or just build off each
Okay.
other. But he asks, given that torts of emotional outrage exist, would it be reasonable to sue someone for blackface given the level of offense experienced by the victim?
Let me, because I think he posted in chat. Let me look at what the question was. Sorry.
Yeah, I just reposted it in debate chat, so it's at the bottom.
Does emotional outrage exist? Would it be reasonable to sue someone for blackface given the level of offense experienced by the victim? I mean, yeah, my position is perfectly compatible with allowing civil action against people. I just don't think it should be a criminal matter. And then I guess I'll take the follow up too. So then I'll hand it over to Cam. Should this tort be applied more broadly to other things considered hate crimes that aren't physically, financially harmful? Well, yeah, I think that that's just a question for the courts. I don't have any problem with it being litigated.
Sorry, where's the question? Would it be reasonable to sue someone for blackface, that sort of thing? Uh,
Yeah.
I think that yes, it would be reasonable to sue someone, and I think that the law being on their side would be very helpful in that case because uh the amount of damage that it can do is enough that there should be a way for people to stop it because if it were to run rampant in the society, again in the same manner as, torturing people or creating just intense psychological harm for no reason or for the purpose of like comedy, that sort of thing would be damaging to our society. It would be damaging to too many people's lives. So we have to be able to say, okay, you know what, this is worth more than a joke. Let's just draw the line. Um, I think that suing is very reasonable. Um, compared to, I would say that jail sentences can be reasonable for something like blackface, but suing someone's out of the question. Of course, that's reasonable. I would say, and the level of offense would be uh related to it. But I think that we should have the ability to break it up in the moment, and that's sort of one of the distinctions of something being a crime, because it prevents the harm.
Awesome. And the follow up question that Walt had to that, Cam, is should this tort be applied more broadly to other things considered hate crimes that aren't physically or financially harmful? Oh, I guess he got kicked. He might have lagged out. Let me just unmute you again, Cam.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know what's happening today. It's acting up.
Oh, no worries at all. Did you hear the follow up question?
I didn't.
Oh, no worries. I just posted the follow up question in debate chat, but basically it's a follow up question. The first one it asks, should this tort be applied more broadly to other things considered hate crimes that aren't physically or financially harmful?
Uh, I think that yes, and I think that there should be specific sort of demarcations of how bad this thing is. It shouldn't necessarily carry a mega intense penalty, but it should be on paper considered a crime such that people can stop it, similar to vandalism. If someone is vandalizing your property, you can call the police and stop them then and there. I think that this is something similar, but we don't give people life sentences for vandalism. I think that things like this should be the same kind of case.